Hey folks, Quill18 here, bringing you another audio commentary for League of Legends. Again, this is going to be another, not so much a commentary as an analysis of the various items available for purchase in the shop. This is a continuation of my last video, which I entitled Defense Items, because I looked at the items that fall under the defense category. Now, that actually covers the majority of the items, because there's so much crossover between categories. Even items that are mostly about attack or something else will fall under the defense category because they happen to give you some health or armor or something at the same time. So if you are looking for an item that I haven't talked about in this video, it's probably in the defense item video. So without further ado, I'm going to get started here. So attack and damage. Again, just like the last video, there's sort of two classes of items to talk about here. There are items that are cheap enough to purchase at the start of the game, so we're going to talk about the value of the items in that context, and then there are items that you build as a recipe, and so they sort of operate in different contexts. I will skip the elixir for now. I'm going to talk about it when I get to the consumables. Let's talk about the longsword. The longsword is cheap enough that you can start with it, and it upgrades into a variety of really good items. Now, I'm not a big fan of starting with the longsword by itself. I'd be a much bigger fan of starting with a Dorn's blade or a Dorn's shield. Like the Dorn's blade, for example, gives you, for the same price effectively, it gives you slightly less damage, but it gives you a bunch of health and the 4% lifesteal, which is quite valuable early on. So you're buying the longsword with the intention of comboing it into some other item very early on. For example, it may be very popular to go longsword into Madred's Razors for an early jungle build or something like that. Or longsword into Phage, because Phage is such a great item, and getting it early is certainly not a bad thing. That being said, I think it's pretty unusual to start with the longsword. It just, it doesn't give you what a lot of heroes want early on, which is to say a little bit of health regeneration and a little more survivability if things go wrong. Although it does help you kill things a little faster. So, I don't know. I think it's a pretty unusual choice, but it's certainly a possibility. I'm going to skip the Dorn's blade because I've already talked about it. The pickaxe I'm going to skip as well because it's not an item you're buying for itself. You are buying the pickaxe because you're building something with it. And it's too expensive to start with, so I'm not going to have a discussion. Madred's Razors. Actually, I've already talked about this in the defense video. So is the Phage, and now the Brutalizer is a pure attack ability. And this is another item, actually, that you can build off the longsword right away. So one option, if you want a really early Brutalizer, you could start with the longsword and then upgrade it. This is a really, really cheap item. Excuse me if my voice is a little hoarse this morning. It is the morning, first thing in the morning. I'm doing this while I eat breakfast, actually. You know what my breakfast is? Chocolate cake. That's right. My birthday was yesterday, and I decided that for breakfast this morning, I was going to have another piece of chocolate cake, so that's what I'm having. I'm also going to apologize in advance if this video doesn't post all in one piece correctly on YouTube, because I am leaving for a day. I'm going out of town. I'm going to start this uploading just as I leave. This is why I'm doing everything this morning, so hopefully it all uploads the first time, but if there's any missing parts, I apologize. Moving on. The Brutalizer. Very, very good item. How much does it cost to combine? 507 gold. So for 507 gold, you're getting an extra 5 attack power for free, and a unique passive to reduce all your cooldowns by 10% and give you 15% armor penetration. In the last video, I've talked about how armor penetration and magic penetration is a really valuable stat. It actually, point for point, tends to give you more damage than an actual attack damage score, because decreasing someone's armor effectively multiplies your damage by a certain amount. And that multiple is very, very valuable, and it stacks very easily. A lot of people with armor penetration runes, and the more you have, the better. But of course, the reduced ability cooldown is a fantastic stat as well. Not every character can take advantage to it to the same extent. Some people really, really want it, others don't. Melee characters are usually not as concerned with the cooldown reductions as casters, but it still helps. More importantly, the Brutalizer is one of the two items that goes into Youmuu's Ghostblade, and I've talked about Youmuu's Ghostblade in the other video. No, actually I didn't. What am I saying? Let me backtrack here. The Brutalizer is one of the items that builds into Youmuu's Ghostblade, and the Brutalizer by itself is a very strong item, but before this last patch, not very many people were getting it, and the reason why is it didn't upgrade into anything. So while it was very good early on, ultimately it was filling one of your item slots with an item that was perhaps not the greatest, and if it turned into a long game, well, it's not that it's not the greatest, is that, you know, for the cost of an item slot, you weren't necessarily getting that much. For the money, you were getting tons. But now you can upgrade it into the Ghostblade, so it becomes an awesome item. And frankly, I think the Ghostblade is going to be a mandatory item on virtually everyone who is a physical DPS. So we'll talk about it in a little bit. The Sword of the Occult. Speaking of items that upgrade from a longsword, the Sword of the Occult is another snowball item. Like the Leviathan I talked about in the last video, this you are paying 954 gold for nothing at first. The attack damage that you get just from the item by itself is exactly the same as just the longsword. But every time you get a kill, or you get 2 stacks of a buff. Every time you get an assist, you get 1 stack of a buff. What does the buff give you? It gives you 5 extra damage per stack. Stacks up to 20, which means an extra 100 damage. In fact, the item would be giving you 110 damage, and your movement speed would be increased by 15%. Obviously, 110 damage is a lot of damage. I mean, that outdoes the Bloodthirster. And the movement speed is fantastic. But you do lose stacks if you're going to die. The question is, how many stacks do you need to be able to maintain for this to be worth the 954 gold that you're paying to upgrade from Longsword, and you know, to keep this in an item slot? The answer is you need, I don't remember if it's 5 or 6 stacks, but you know, that's basically 3 kills, or you know, 5 or 6 assists, or some combination thereof. Once you've got your 5 or 6 stacks, this item is worth the money. That's the break-even point, and anything above that is gravy. So that's not actually that hard to maintain. I mean, unless you're really feeding. So really, this is going to come down to, how is your early game? Were you able to get a first blood? In which case, a quick Sword of the Occult may be very good because you've got an edge on people. Of course, you're going to have a slight disadvantage in that you've wasted, you know, quote unquote, 954 gold early on that gave you no advantage. So, you know, you sort of need a head start, and then you need to take a step back by spending this money for no immediate benefit, but hopefully your overall head start is enough that you can start really, really farming people, or at the very least not dying, you know. Sometimes it doesn't mean that you turn into a huge monster that can kill everyone really quickly. As long as you don't die, you will eventually pick up a few assists, maybe, you know, a lucky kill or two, and then it'll start paying for itself, and then, you know, hopefully you can snowball this into a whole 20 stacks. These snowball items are not going to be recommended for beginners. You're going to want to get this if you're fairly confident that you can not die very often. That's really the key. It's less about getting lots of kills, more about not dying. So you need to be survivable. That's why it's no good for beginners. I don't know what else to say about it. But it is a very, very good item. And one thing that you may want to consider is play one champion a lot. Get really good with one guy, and it will let you really master some aspect of the game, and hopefully you can use that to, you know, improve your game, go up in level, meet, you know, better players, and continue to improve yourself. And with that one guy, if it's a person that you can use a Sword of the Occult with, hopefully that's, you know, then it becomes a viable purchase. Anyway, I've babbled on way too long about this item. It's not even that important. Not that many people get the Sword of the Occult. BF Sword. Even though this is an item that is basically just a recipe item, the BF Sword is worth talking about on its own. Now, if we do the math, I believe that point for point, it's not giving you anything more than a long sword. Let's see. Actually, I'm wrong here. A long sword is 415 gold for 10 attacks. So you need 10 long swords to equal 1 BF sword. Or 5 long swords to equal 1 BF sword. Well, 5 times 415 is going to be 2,075.